It was the height of global war, a time when the oceans were both battlefield and graveyard. The year was 1942. But to understand the strange series of vanishings that haunted the Allied navies, we must look back to the origins of a mystery that began decades earlier. Long before radar, sonar, or satellite surveillance, one ship's disappearance would become a dark omen for those who sailed under the American flag, the USS Cyclops. The Cyclops was no ordinary vessel. Commissioned in 1910, she was one of the largest colliers in the US Navy, a floating powerhouse 542 feet long, designed to carry 12,000 tons of coal and resupply the growing fleet of American battleships. In March 1918, as the First World War neared its end, she departed from the island of Barbados, bound for Baltimore. Aboard were over 300 sailors and officers, along with a cargo of manganese ore destined for American steel production. The voyage should have been routine. It was anything but. No distress call was ever received. No wreckage, no oil slick, no floating debris was ever sighted. It was as if the Cyclops, and everyone aboard her, had been erased from the sea. In the years that followed, the US Navy conducted one of the largest maritime searches in its history, scouring the waters of the Caribbean and mid-Atlantic. The official report concluded only that the ship had disappeared without a trace. President Woodrow Wilson himself lamented, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." 2 decades later, with World War II underway, the story of the Cyclops still lingered in naval memory, a ghostly warning whispered among sailors. Yet history has a way of repeating itself. In 1941, 2 of Cyclops' sister ships, the USS Proteus and USS Nereus, both vanished under strikingly similar circumstances. Each left port in the Caribbean on a cargo mission. Each carried heavy loads of ore, and neither was ever heard from again. These disappearances occurred in the same general region of the Western Atlantic, near the area later sensationalized as the Bermuda Triangle. The US Navy launched exhaustive investigations. Naval engineers considered the possibility of structural weakness, that the Proteus-class design, with its long, narrow hull and heavy cargo, might have been prone to catastrophic stress failure in rough seas. Others suspected enemy involvement. By 1941, German U-boats roamed the Atlantic freely, ambushing convoys and cutting off Allied supply lines. It was possible, some reasoned, that one or both ships had fallen victim to torpedoes from U-boat wolf packs operating near Bermuda and the Windward Passage. Yet, even with post-war access to captured German naval logs, no U-boat commander ever claimed credit. One cryptic entry from the USS Nereus's logbook, recorded days before her final transmission, mentioned unusual weather and magnetic disturbance affecting the ship's compass bearings. The line may have been routine, a notation of nothing more than a storm's interference. But in the absence of survivors or wreckage, every clue, no matter how small, took on the weight of meaning. Some later speculated that both ships had been lost to sudden squalls, rogue waves capable of capsizing entire freighters without warning. But again, such explanations failed to account for the complete lack of debris. For the sailors of the US Merchant Marine and Navy who followed, these cases became something more than maritime accidents. They became symbols of the ocean's quiet dominion over men and machines. As the war expanded across the globe, the memory of the Cyclops, Proteus, and Nereus persisted like a riddle written into the sea itself. Navy training manuals briefly referenced the design's vulnerabilities, but official policy avoided public mention of the disappearances. The war needed focus, not fear. In later decades, the loss of these ships would be folded into pop culture myths about the Bermuda Triangle. But their reality was far more human. The story of hundreds of men swallowed by the war's silent frontier. Their families never received remains, no graves, no closure, only telegrams marked missing, presumed lost. One surviving letter from a sailor aboard the Proteus, dated December 1941, reads, "The sea feels strange this week. She has a stillness I can't explain." It would be his final message, even now. The US Navy lists the disappearances of the Cyclops, Proteus, and Nereus as unsolved losses. Modern sonar mapping of the seafloor around Bermuda has revealed thousands of wrecks, yet none bearing the identity of those ships. Somewhere beneath miles of dark water, they rest, entombed in silence. 3 ships, one design, and a pattern that defies explanation. Were they victims of engineering flaws, enemy attack, or something in the ocean itself that defies record? The Navy's answer remains the same as it did in 1918. No known cause. But as we move deeper into the Second World War, we find the same mystery repeating itself, in different seas, under different flags, but with the same haunting silence when the final signal fades. Next, we turn to the Mediterranean, where one British submarine simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but questions. By 1941, the war at sea had become a brutal, invisible duel, a contest of nerves, silence, and steel beneath the waves. Britain's Royal Navy, stretched thin across every ocean, relied heavily on its submarines to strike Axis shipping and disrupt supply lines between Italy, North Africa, and occupied Europe. Among those boats was HMS Regulus, a Parthian-class submarine assigned to the hard-fought waters of the central Mediterranean. On the morning of November 26, 1940, Regulus slipped quietly out of Malta's Grand Harbour and into the blue expanse south of Sicily. It was the last time anyone would see her. Regulus was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Frederick P. Norman, a disciplined officer with a reputation for caution. His orders were to patrol the approaches to Taranto, the same Italian port recently attacked by British carrier aircraft, and to report any enemy movement. The submarine carried a crew of 58 men, all experienced in the perilous Mediterranean theatre. They had seen friends vanish before. Submarines like HMS Odin and HMS Grampus, both lost earlier that year without trace. The Mediterranean was, as one sailor put it, a hunting ground where the hunter often became the hunted. After her departure, Regulus was expected to send a routine position report within 3 days. She never did. By December 6th, British command classified her as overdue. Initial optimism gave way to grim resignation as days passed with no word. Search flights scoured the Sicilian Channel. Destroyers patrolled the coasts of Malta and Libya, listening for sonar echoes or wreckage. Nothing surfaced. It was as though Regulus had dissolved into the sea. Wartime records from both sides offered tantalizing but conflicting clues. Italian naval documents mention minefields freshly laid near the island of Pantelleria, directly in Regulus's assigned patrol zone. It is possible she struck one of these mines and was lost instantly, but Italian minefield charts recovered after the war revealed discrepancies. Certain zones marked as active had already been cleared, others mislabeled entirely. If Regulus hit a mine, the exact location remains unknown. Another theory suggested she may have been depth-charged by Italian destroyers responding to a false sonar contact, though no confirmed kill was ever reported. A fragment of Regulus's last known communication, an unverified intercept picked up by British listening stations in Alexandria, contained a single phrase: "Battery conditions poor, will dive shallow." If genuine, it implied mechanical problems. British subs in the region often struggled with battery fires and ventilation issues, particularly after long patrols. One miscalculation in depth, one leak or one mechanical failure could turn a submarine into a steel coffin within minutes. In those final moments, the sea offers no mercy, and no evidence remains. The families of the crew received their official notifications in early 1941. Missing, presumed lost on war service, the telegrams read. In Portsmouth, the wife of Petty Officer Charles Tilling wrote in her diary, "They say perhaps it was quick, that he wouldn't have known. But I keep listening for the postman, hoping they're wrong." The grief was not unique. By 1942, Britain had lost over 40 submarines in the Mediterranean alone. The case of HMS Regulus grew even stranger after the war. Declassified intelligence reports suggested that an Italian fishing vessel had retrieved a section of unidentified submarine plating from the Sicilian coast in 1943, painted in Royal Navy grey. The fragment was never conclusively tied to Regulus, and its current whereabouts are unknown. No human remains, no conning tower, no torpedo tubes, only the sea, keeping its secrets. In 2019, maritime archaeologists from the University of Malta conducted sonar sweeps of the Pantelleria Channel, mapping hundreds of anomalies. One sonar return, a long cylindrical shadow resting upright in the silt, measured 280 feet in length, the exact size of a Parthian-class submarine. But strong currents and wartime debris have made identification impossible without manned dives. Funding and geopolitical restrictions have delayed any recovery mission. To this day, the wreck remains unconfirmed, its identity lost among the many forgotten graves of the Mediterranean. For the Royal Navy, the loss of Regulus was both tactical and symbolic. She represented the unseen sacrifice of the silent service, crews who fought and died without the glory of headlines or the certainty of graves. Admiral Sir Max Horton, head of the submarine service, once remarked, "In war, we honor those we can see, but the sea has taken more than we shall ever know." His words captured the quiet agony of families who received no remains, no relics, only the weight of absence. The disappearance of HMS Regulus raised questions that linger still. Did faulty intelligence send her into a mined corridor? Was she hunted down by unseen enemies? Or did the sea itself simply claim her, indifferent to the men inside? In the silence of the deep, even truth corrodes with time. As Britain mourned her missing submarine, across the Atlantic the US Navy faced a similar mystery, one that began with a proud new vessel and ended with nothing but speculation in the warm waters of the Caribbean. October 6, 1943. The Caribbean Sea lay deceptively calm beneath a moonless sky. The US Navy submarine USS Dorado, SS-248, a freshly commissioned Gato-class boat, was en route from New London, Connecticut, to the Panama Canal for her first war patrol. She carried 77 officers and crew, along with engineers and specialists. For the men aboard, it was the culmination of months of training and anticipation, their first combat assignment. None of them would be heard from again. The Dorado was the pride of the Navy's expanding submarine fleet, 311 feet long, bristling with 10 torpedo tubes, deck guns, and the latest in sonar and radar equipment. Her mission was straightforward: to reach the Pacific through the canal, then join the growing submarine campaign against Japanese shipping. The route was familiar, the conditions routine. Yet somewhere between Key West and Colon, she vanished, without a signal, without a trace. The first sign that something was wrong came when Dorado failed to arrive at her scheduled waypoint on October 14th. US Naval Command issued a standard overdue notice, expecting mechanical delay or communication failure. But when her expected arrival at the canal passed 2 days later, concern turned to alarm. Search aircraft from the Navy's Caribbean Sea Frontier Command were scrambled, sweeping the region from Cuba's southern coast to the Yucatan Channel. Destroyers and patrol craft joined the hunt. They found nothing, not even an oil slick. Theories emerged almost immediately. The Caribbean during 1943 was a deadly theater. German U-boats, notably U-214 and U-518, prowled the same waters, targeting tankers and freighters en route to the canal zone. Intelligence later revealed that U-214 had mined areas along Dorado's planned route. Some believed she struck one of these mines, sinking instantly, but others pointed to a more tragic, self-inflicted possibility: friendly fire. According to declassified reports, a US Army Air Forces bomber from the 1st Anti-Submarine Squadron had attacked a submarine on the night of October 12th, near Dorado's last known coordinates. The pilot, flying a PBM Mariner, reported sighting a dark sub-silhouette moving on surface course 090 degrees. Believing it hostile, he released 2 depth charges. Moments later, a second bomber patrolling the same region made a similar attack. Both aircraft claimed hits. Neither pilot could confirm destruction. But post-war analysis revealed that no German submarines were lost in the Caribbean that week. The possibility loomed large. Had Dorado been mistaken for an enemy by her own side? To complicate matters, radio traffic between Key West and Canal Command showed confusion over Dorado's exact patrol boundary. Some intercepts indicated she was ordered to avoid a restricted bombing area off Colon, but a miscommunication or outdated chart may have sent her straight into it. The fog of war, the bureaucratic chaos of dozens of commands managing hundreds of vessels, might have sealed her fate before she even saw. Combat families of the crew received official notice on November 1st, 1943. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, son, or brother is missing following war operations. Among them was the family of Lieutenant Commander E.L. Barr Jr., Dorado's captain. His wife, writing to the Navy in December, pleaded for clarification. Was she lost in action or by mistake? I only asked to know if he died fighting or in confusion. The Navy's response offered no answers, only the phrase, "No further information available." In the years following the war, U-boat records captured from Germany provided new leads. And more questions. U-204's logs confirmed the laying of mines near Cologne, but also recorded a sonar contact and evasive maneuver in the same region days later. Some historians believe Dorado may have been damaged, but not destroyed by friendly attack, then limped unknowingly into mined waters while attempting to reach port. Others argue she may have suffered catastrophic mechanical failure, her inexperienced crew unable to surface in time. The wreck has never been found, despite multiple expeditions, including a 2015 sonar survey funded by the Naval History and Heritage Command. No definitive evidence of Dorado has surfaced. The seafloor of the Western Caribbean remains a tangled graveyard of wartime debris, sunken merchantmen, mines, and submarine wrecks from both sides. Any one of them could be Dorado, or none of them. Her story embodies the cruel irony of submarine warfare, where stealth and secrecy, the very tools of survival, often ensured that when disaster struck, no one knew where or why, as one wartime submariner later reflected. When a boat goes down, it doesn't die loud, it just stops talking. Even today, the name Dorado endures among US Navy crews as a cautionary legend. Her plaque at the Submarine Memorial in Groton reads simply, "Lost at sea, October 1943, cause unknown." And in the deep silence of the Caribbean, her resting place remains undisturbed, a steel tomb guarded by the ocean's indifference. But Dorado's mystery was not the last. Thousands of miles away, off the remote coast of Western Australia, another vessel, larger, prouder, and seemingly invincible, would vanish after a brutal, one-sided duel that left only conflicting stories and unanswered questions. November 19th, 1941, off the lonely expanse of Western Australia's coast, two ships met by chance and changed naval history forever. One was the pride of the Royal Australian Navy, the light cruiser HMAS Sydney, a 6,800-ton warship armed with 8 6-inch guns and crewed by 645 men. The other was the German auxiliary cruiser Cormoran, a disguised merchant raider built to deceive, stalk, and destroy Allied shipping under false colours. Within hours, both would vanish from sight, one consumed by fire, the other scuttled by her crew. For 66 years, no one knew where Sydney lay. The Sydney's last confirmed sighting came shortly after 4 p.m. on that fateful day. She was returning to Fremantle from escort duty in the Indian Ocean, heading for home waters. Around 4:30, her lookouts reported a suspicious vessel, a freighter flying Dutch colours and identifying herself as the Straat Malacca. Captain Joseph Burnett, an experienced officer but cautious by nature, ordered the cruiser to close the distance for inspection. Unbeknownst to him, the ship was no merchantman at all. It was Cormoran, commanded by Kapitän zur See Theodor Detmers, one of Germany's most successful commerce raiders. Cormoran's mission had been one of stealth and deception. Outfitted with concealed 5.9-inch guns, torpedo tubes, and hundreds of mines, she had already sunk or captured 10 Allied ships by feigning neutrality. Detmers had strict orders: avoid combat with major warships at all costs. But when the Sydney approached within a mile, dangerously close, the German captain realized escape was impossible. He lowered his disguise, raised the Kriegsmarine battle ensign, and opened fire. The ensuing battle was brutal and swift. At point-blank range, Cormoran's first salvo tore through Sydney's bridge, killing Captain Burnett and much of his command crew instantly. Her forward turrets managed to return fire, striking Cormoran amidships and igniting her engine room. Torpedoes from the German ship slammed into Sydney's hull, flooding her forward compartments. For half an hour, the two vessels exchanged deadly fire, until both were burning wrecks adrift in the darkness. Cormoran's crew scuttled their ship and abandoned her. Sydney, mortally wounded, drifted south, her lights flickering in the Black Sea. By dawn, Cormoran's survivors, 317 out of 397 men, had been rescued by Australian patrols. But Sydney was gone. Not a single sailor from her crew was ever found alive. The only physical evidence recovered in the weeks that followed was a single lifeboat and a badly burned Carly float, discovered hundreds of miles from the battle site. The rest of the wreck, and the truth of what happened in those final hours, would remain buried under the waves for decades. The mystery of Sydney's disappearance became one of Australia's greatest wartime enigmas. How could a modern cruiser, faster, better armed, and armoured than her opponent, be destroyed so completely? Why had she closed the distance to an unknown ship without verifying its identity by signal or aircraft reconnaissance? And, most hauntingly, why had there been no distress call? For years, suspicion and rumor filled the void left by uncertainty. Some claimed the German survivors had executed Australian sailors, or that Sydney had been lured into a trap involving a U-boat. Others accused the Australian government of covering up errors in command. None of it could be proven. Detmers himself, captured and interrogated, maintained his version of events until his death, that Sydney had simply been caught off guard at close range and destroyed by chance and courage. Not conspiracy, archival. Documents released decades later confirmed no German submarines were operating near Western Australia at the time, yet questions persisted. Why had Sydney approached so close? Why had none of her survivors made it to shore despite calm weather and floating debris? Families of the lost crew gathered every year in Fremantle, reading the names of husbands, sons and fathers who vanished without trace, save the sea. It wasn't until March 2008 that the mystery finally began to yield its secrets. After years of research led by historian David Mearns and the Finding Sydney Foundation, sonar scans located 2 wrecks 120 miles off Shark Bay, one German, one Australian. The positions matched survivors' accounts with eerie precision. The Sydney lay upright on the seabed, her bow severed by a torpedo blast, her guns trained toward Cormoran's last known course. The discovery confirmed much of Detmer's testimony, but also raised new questions. Why had Sydney's damage control systems failed so catastrophically? Why had none of her crew managed to send a distress signal, despite multiple radio operators aboard? Marine archaeologists studying the wreck noted blast patterns suggesting secondary explosions in her magazines, perhaps triggered by fire spreading from her bridge. It explained the ship's sudden disappearance, but not her silence. One theory suggested her communications aerials were destroyed in the opening salvo, rendering her unable to call for help. If true, it meant that in her final minutes Sydney was deaf and blind, dying in darkness, unrecorded. For Australia, the rediscovery of Sydney was both closure and heartbreak. Memorials across the nation lit once more for the 645 souls lost without warning, their resting place finally found. But even with the truth laid bare, a sense of mystery lingered. A modern warship, undone by an act of deception, by a chance encounter, by the cruel symmetry of fate at sea. The story of Sydney and Cormoran is not only about combat, it's about trust, judgment, and the razor-thin line between vigilance and vulnerability. And as the world learned of her fate, another question arose. How many more ships, in other oceans, had simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions on the shifting tides? The loss of HMS Sydney sent ripples through every Allied fleet, a haunting reminder that even the strongest warships could vanish overnight. But Sydney's story was not unique. Across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, other ships slipped beneath the surface without distress calls or survivors, leaving behind only speculation and silence. Among them was one of Australia's closest wartime allies, the United States Navy, whose own wartime disappearances continue to defy explanation. By 1944, the tide of war had turned in the Allies' favor, yet as the Pacific campaign intensified, the demands placed on logistics and escort operations were immense. Hundreds of destroyers, tankers, and cargo ships crossed the seas daily, many in isolation or small groups. With the Japanese submarine threat still potent, the US Navy depended on convoy routes stretching from San Francisco and Pearl Harbor to the Philippines and beyond. But not every ship made it home. One such case was that of the USS Kaplan, SS-289, a Balao-class submarine under the command of Lieutenant Commander E.F. Benson. On November 17, 1943, Kaplan departed Darwin, Australia for her second patrol. Her orders, to operate in the Celebes Sea, striking enemy convoys between Halmahera and Mindanao. She reported sighting a Japanese mine layer and engaged in light skirmishes near the Molucca Passage. Her last transmission came on November 23rd. After that, silence. When Kaplan failed to return to port in mid-December, she was declared overdue and presumed lost. But unlike many wartime disappearances, her case had peculiar details. Another US submarine, USS Bonefish, reported hearing an underwater explosion in Kaplan's patrol area around December the 2nd, followed by a second, smaller detonation minutes later. Was it a torpedo malfunction, a mine strike, or an attack by Japanese aircraft? No one could say. Post-war Japanese records revealed no anti-submarine action in that sector during those days. The ocean had swallowed both ship and story. Years later, divers discovered traces of wreckage near Cow Island, Indonesia, consistent with a submarine hull, but tropical waters and time had erased all markings, leaving identification uncertain. Some researchers believe Kaplan struck a newly laid Japanese minefield that had not yet appeared on Allied charts. Others suspect a mechanical failure, a common fate among submarines forced to dive deep in poorly charted tropical waters. The lack of physical evidence has kept the mystery alive, a ghost on the US Navy's official missing list. It was not only submarines that vanished. In 1944, the Liberty ship SS John A. Johnson, loaded with munitions bound for the Pacific Front, simply disappeared en route from San Francisco to Hawaii. She was last sighted on October 29th, sailing under clear skies. No radio calls, no distress beacons, just absence. Months later, a lifeboat washed ashore on the Hawaiian coast, battered and empty. Some speculated she had been struck by a Japanese I-boat torpedo. Others believed her volatile cargo detonated internally. With no wreck found, both remain possibilities. The US Navy classified many such incidents as cause undetermined. Wartime chaos, limited communication, and enemy deception often made truth impossible to verify. But to the families of those aboard, the classification was no comfort. As one widow wrote to the Bureau of Naval Personnel in 1946, "Missing without trace means I have no grave to visit. It means the ocean itself has taken his name." In modern times, these disappearances have been re-examined using sonar, diving technology, and declassified intelligence. The Kaplan, the Dorado, the Cyclops all share patterns, last known positions within mined waters, conflicting logs, and missing communication records. Maritime historians suggest that navigational errors caused by wartime secrecy, altered waypoints, coded routes, and sudden mission changes contributed to many vanishings. A single wrong coordinate could send a ship into danger unknown even to its own command. These mysteries also reveal the limits of wartime record-keeping. Many ships that vanished were later confirmed sunk, but only after decades of research. Others remain missing, their fates sealed beneath miles of ocean. Even with today's technology, large sections of the seafloor remain unexplored. The ocean keeps its secrets, unbothered by time. One name, however, stood apart in collective memory: HMS Sydney. Her rediscovery in 2008 rekindled hope that the others too might one day be found. But not all wrecks reveal closure. For every ship located, dozens remain unaccounted for, their positions unmarked on maps, their crews' names carved only in memorial walls. In the years after the war, naval historians would call it the Age of Silent Losses. Ships that simply ceased to exist, their stories surviving only in faded logbooks and unanswered transmissions. And while nations rebuilt and moved on, the oceans remained untouched, vast, indifferent, and eternal. The vanishings of Sydney, Kaplan, and others stand as somber reminders of the price of war, fought not only against men, but against the elements themselves. And as the war's final year drew near, one last series of disappearances, a pattern spanning continents and oceans, would bring the mystery full circle, closing a chapter that remains unresolved even to this day. By 1945, the guns of World War II were falling silent. Europe lay in ruins, Japan's empire was collapsing, and the oceans that had once teemed with fleets of steel were growing still again. Yet even in those closing months, with victory within reach, ships continued to vanish. Some were merchant vessels, others naval patrols, all swallowed without explanation. To the men who survived the war, it became clear. Peace might end the fighting, but it would never reveal the full truth of what the sea had taken. The final months of the war saw chaos unlike anything before. Convoys crossed oceans thick with mines. Storm systems battered ships already weakened by years of combat. Naval intelligence logs from the period describe unaccounted losses. Vessels listed as departed, never recorded as arrived. In many cases, it wasn't enemy fire or sabotage, but simple misfortune. Navigational errors, mechanical failure, or catastrophic weather events. But in others, something darker lingered. Missing messages, inconsistent coordinates, censored reports. One of the last Allied ships to disappear before the war's end was the British submarine HMS Urge. Ordered to relocate from Malta to Alexandria in April 1942, she never reached port. Decades later, her wreck would finally be found off Malta's coast, revealing that she had struck a mine minutes after departure. For 77 years, she was lost without a trace. Her rediscovery reminded historians that for every mystery solved, dozens remain, scattered across forgotten sea lanes from the Atlantic to the Coral Sea. Other vessels have not been so fortunate. The US Navy's USS Flyer, USS Golet, and USS Grayling all vanished in 1944 and 1945 with entire crews. Only fragments of intelligence hint at their fates. Flyer's wreck was found in the Balabac Strait, torn open by a mine. Golet was confirmed destroyed off northern Honshu, its wreckage rediscovered only in 2019. But the Grayling remains missing. Her last transmission placed her in the Philippine Sea, shadowing Japanese shipping. Then nothing. No distress call, no radar contact. She simply ceased to exist. 70 men vanished into a silence as complete as that which claimed the Cyclops nearly 30 years earlier. Across navies, the pattern was the same. Isolated disappearances, sudden silence, no survivors. For families, the uncertainty was unbearable. Killed in action at least meant a final moment of defiance, a trace of purpose. But missing, presumed lost, was an open wound that never healed. In letters preserved by the Imperial War Museum, one mother wrote of her son lost on the HMS Regulus. "I think of him not beneath the sea, but somewhere still on watch, for we never heard the word he was gone." After the war, Allied investigators attempted to piece together what records remained. They found that many losses occurred along poorly charted routes, or near minefields whose coordinates had shifted with currents and storms. Even today, thousands of those mines lie undetonated across the world's oceans. Some of the missing ships may have struck these drifting relics decades after the war ended, their wrecks scattered and unrecognizable. Technological advances have brought a new era of discovery. Deep-sea sonar mapping, remotely operated vehicles, and autonomous underwater drones have located wrecks once thought lost forever. The discovery of HMS Sydney in 2008, followed by USS Indianapolis in 2017, proved that even the deepest secrets of the sea can be found if we are patient enough to listen. Yet with every discovery, the same question surfaces. How could so many ships, in an age of radio and radar, vanish without a single message? Historians point to the vastness of the wartime oceans, millions of square miles, sparsely patrolled and poorly mapped. A single mechanical failure, a fire in a radio room, or a sudden explosion could silence a vessel before a word was sent. Even modern submariners acknowledge the ocean's unrelenting power, as one US Navy diver remarked during a 2019 survey of a WWII wreck. "Down there, time doesn't pass. The war never ended, it just went quiet." And so the mystery endures. 5 ships, Cyclops, Regulus, Dorado, Sydney, Kaplan, each separated by years and oceans, yet bound by a shared fate, disappearance without trace. They remind us that even in the age of mechanized war and coded communication, nature retains the final word. The sea, that vast, unknowable force, remains undefeated. As the camera pans across archival footage, the rolling grey waves of the Atlantic, the still blue of the Pacific, the rusting bones of ships rediscovered, the narrator's voice softens. The war's survivors are gone now, their stories passed down through letters, logbooks, and whispered remembrance. The missing ships remain silent, their secrets entombed beneath miles of water. And perhaps that is fitting, for the ocean was both battlefield and witness, and like all great witnesses, it keeps its silence. The final words of a naval report from 1946 capture it best. "Ships may vanish, but the sea remembers." The mystery of the 5 lost ships is not merely about what was lost, but about what endures. The courage of sailors who face the unknown, and the haunting truth that some questions will forever remain unanswered, somewhere beneath the waves.